Hikers and backpackers of Reddit, what is the weirdest or creepiest thing you have found while hiking? I work in the outdoor field and lead trips regularly. I once led a trip to the top of Mount Stringer in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top, and about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle school kids and had one co-instructor. We were camping out on top of the mountain, and it was a beautiful night with a full moon. The kids and the other co-instructor went to bed in their tents. I chose to spend the night in a hammock that night. I was really into a book I was reading, so I stayed up and read until about 10:30 p.m. I turned my headlamp off to settle in for the night. Everything around me was rather bright from the moon, and from the position I was in, I could see down the trail we had hiked to get to the top. I lay there enjoying the scenery and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in the area, so I perked up. As it got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere, and there was someone hiking up the trail with no headlamp or any gear. I was just frozen, watching this person move closer to our camp. They arrived at the top of the mountain where we were and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man surveyed our camp. I really could only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but may have been 10. He then turned and sat down under a tree facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that I knew he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there staring at our camp. I had no idea what to do. I decided to wait it out. I waited, just staring at the man while he stared at my camp. This went on until about 3:30 a.m. Then he stood up, took a moment to survey my camp a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail he came up on. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about, but it freaked me out. I was paranoid that we were being followed for the rest of the trip. Story 2. This happened while I was backpacking in the Goat Rocks Wilderness in Washington State. My friend and I were trying to get up into a certain basin above the tree line, and we got a really late start thanks to road construction, so we were really hoofing it up the trail trying to make camp before dark. My friend hikes way faster than I do, so he got way out ahead of me, and by the time I got to where our detour from the main trail up an informal boot path would take us up into the basin, he was nowhere to be seen. So, there being no campsites near where I stopped, I backtracked for about 3/4 of a mile to a lake where there were established campsites right along the trail. After maybe an hour, my friend shows up, having realized his mistake. This is well after dark. And we settled in, not really knowing our surroundings. It was a fairly large open area, though, likely a horse camp area because the trail is popular with horse packers, but we encountered none. Set up our tents, both one person, ate, and went to bed. Neither of us usually sleep well when backpacking, but for whatever reason he was out cold, and I was sort of lucid at best for quite a while, just listening to the sounds of nature and trying not to psych myself out about the possible demons and monsters and man-eating beasts lurking in the woods every time I heard a twig snap or a pine cone fall from a tree. So, maybe 3 or so hours after I went to bed, this would have been maybe 1 a.m., I start hearing a very distinct sound of really heavy footsteps around my camp area, maybe as much as 100 feet away. I didn't really think to analyze the patterns the footsteps made at the time, but I remember it sounding distinctly bipedal. You can usually pick out a deer or mountain goat because they don't plant their feet in pairs. Other than these occasional footsteps, it's basically dead silent. No crickets. Or rustling of bushes or anything. That silence was instantly shattered by the most terrifying sound I have ever heard in my life. It was basically the same intensity as a whistle on a steam train, but much, much deeper and more demonic sounding, almost like a cross between a cow mooing and a lion's roar, but loud enough that it echoed off the mountains on the opposite side of the valley. Immediately after this noise, this creature went hauling ass off into the woods, crashing through the bushes. The forest I could see when I set up camp was basically covered in head-high huckleberry shrubs, but remained running around in earshot for at least 2 minutes, running back and forth, sometimes getting distinctly closer, sometimes getting farther away. All this time, it sounded like it was a creature with 2 legs running around. This whole time, my heart was doing about 200 beats per minute, and I was sure I was going to be eaten by a chupacabra or something. After a couple of minutes, the footsteps faded and it fell silent again, and I never heard anything else. I probably lay awake for at least another hour before I finally fell asleep. My friend didn't hear a damn thing. In the morning when I woke up, I looked around and there was a wide open area that led down to a small beach at the nearby lake to see if there was any evidence of what the noise was. Turns out there were fresh elk prints in the mud near the lake, and maybe 20 to 30 feet away was a large print of either a cougar or a bear, I don't remember which. So likely something was stalking one of the elk that wandered near my camp and spooked it in the middle of the night and caused it to spaz the hell out. At least, that's what I hope it was. Story 3, this happened to me back in the 1980s, when I was in my 20s. On occasion, I would go car camping with my yellow tiger cat, Oberon. He had an overbite, drooled, had a monster purr, and was awesome in every way. He loved riding in the car. My solo camping was stupid, and I cannot recommend it, but I needed the aloneness, and I needed the bravery. I would drive up roads, some BLM, some national forest, some disused logging roads, never too far. Find a spot that appealed to me, pull off the road as far as I could, set up a small camp, and stay for a night or two. I'd read, birdwatch, paint, be with my cat, just spend time being me. One day, I went up a road and found a pretty meadow with a small stream curving through the trees, a perfect place. The cat and I wandered around a bit, checking it out. At the side of the meadow, near the road, was a large, flat, round rock, a perfect table. I always packed good food and liked a bit of elegance. I set out a placemat, a cloth napkin, an unopened bottle of dark beer, my sandwich still wrapped in foil on my plate, cookies, and a bowl of kibble for Oberon. He wandered off a bit, so I went to get him. We wandered into the trees for a bit. It was a very lovely day, warm, sunny, with a light breeze, and the whole area was beautiful. We were not out of sight of my car or the rock for very long, maybe 15 minutes. I picked up the cat and walked back, looking forward to lunch. When we got to the rock, it was gone, eaten, the foil was crumpled into a ball, the beer was empty with the opener next to the bottle, cookies gone, sandwich gone, napkin folded loosely, and knife laid across the plate. It was an oh shit feeling. I ran for the car, tossed Oberon in, started the car, and headed back down the hill. Then I thought, what if whoever ate my food was hiding in my back seat? Heart pounding, I checked the back. All okay. I headed back to town, and my friends, who were understandably freaked out by my story. I still camped after that, but it took a while for my courage to return. Story 4. I was hiking in the Hoh Rainforest on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington back in '03. I was trying to do this really snazzy hike from the ocean to Mount Olympus. Well, day 1 is a blast. Get everything accomplished. Day 2, fog. Fog as thick as anything you can imagine. I can't get a decent GPS fix, so I'm pretty much blind, but I know if I follow the Hoh River upstream, I'll get to one of the campsites I'm going for. Day goes by, and the fog isn't clearing up at all. I get to a fairly big clearing and set up my tent. I grab a power bar and chill out as it starts going to the darkest black night I've ever experienced. I'm seriously a bit unnerved at the whole thing, not scared as much as just anxious. About 2 in the morning, I start hearing this huffing noise, like Darth Vader without the helmet on. My imagination starts to go freaky, and I reach for my flashlight. I pull the drawstring on the tent a little, very quietly, and poke my head out, still dark as death. I hear the noise coming from maybe 5 feet to my right. At this point, I'm seriously rethinking my belief in Sasquatch. I poke my flashlight out and turn it on. I'm a few feet away from a massive Roosevelt elk, who'd lost his way in the dark as well. He sees the flashlight, bolts the other way, tags a tree, and knocks himself clean out. I laid in the tent until I heard a groan, a bunch of commotion, and the big guy grunt away. Story 5. Been waiting years for this question, hiking alone at dusk, doing a 5-mile loop in the Santa Monica Mountains in Los Angeles. I see another lone hiker approaching from the opposite direction. As he gets closer, I suddenly realize I know this person. It's the guy who played James Gumb, aka Buffalo Bill, in Silence of the Lambs. We get within 3 feet of each other. He looks at me. He sees the lightning bolt of recognition hit my face. His sad and resigned expression back said it all. Yes, I'm him. No, I'm not really a serial killer. I walked briskly by him anyway, and didn't look back until I was a good 100 yards down the trail. Story 6. I lived in a national park by myself, for 3 months. Several times when I was going back to my trailer for the day, I would hear music, like a music box or an ice cream truck. It was always loud and sounded like it was coming from somewhere over my head. One day I decided to look for the source, so I followed the dirt road past my trailer. The music continued. I couldn't tell if I was getting closer or not. I had my eyes on the trees and looked down just in time to avoid stepping on a snake. I scrambled back, but it didn't move. I realized it was dead, and it wasn't alone. There were half a dozen dead copperheads stretched out in the road, looking in the same direction. I went back to get my car because I couldn't bring myself to step over them, but by the time I got my keys, the music had stopped, and I didn't hear it again. Edit. Sometime after this happened, my friends told me there was a haunted prison in the same park, the P Farm, so that was good to know. Story 7. Bushwalking in Ennisstone, Australia. Me and my friend came across this weird platform-looking thing made out of rocks. Later that year, the cops arrested some bloke on suspicion of the murders of a series of backpackers who had gone missing over the course of a few years, and at the sites of several of the murders, slightly off in the bush, were these altars. Current affairs shows ran footage of one. The trial and run-up to it were all over the news. And yeah, it's that thing we found. The altars were typically no more than 300 yards from the victims' shallow graves. The guy who was arrested and subsequently convicted for the murders is Ivan Mila, Australia's worst serial killer. NB, the cops are pretty sure that at least one other person was involved in the murders than the one now in jail for the crime. They just couldn't prove it. Story 8. I've spent various stretches of time backpacking and camping throughout the US and seen some strange things. My brother and I came across an abandoned trailer, town of sorts, that scared the hell out of us. We also came across a rundown town, really small, out in New Mexico that seemed to have one person living in it. We based that on the fact that there was still some food and supplies there that were fairly fresh, perhaps just a few days old. Spent a couple days there trying to find the person, just to find out why they were staying in the town. Never found a person. We found the skeletal remains of an unknown number of deer, ranging from bucks to fawn, ensnared in a barbed wire fence that encompassed a 10 by 10 area in the Ozarks. A few of the skulls topped the fence posts, and there was one post in the middle of this area that had decaying deer bodies, looked to be 2, but there were only 6 hooves jutting out of the wreckage, wrapped around it. We found a dummy hanging from a tree while in the Yukon Territory of Canada, literally out in the middle of the woods. No reason for it, as far as we know. And we also came across a dead junkie on a road out of Olympia. Obvious overdose, as he had his arm tied and a needle in hand. Eyes were glazed over and staring straight ahead, mouth slightly ajar. Story 9. I was backpacking in New Hampshire and camped out for the night after a day hike. I wandered off from our fire to go take a piss and stumbled upon a circle etched into the ground with tuning forks surrounding the circle, standing up straight. It looked like a creepy ritual circle, and it bugged me out, so I booked it back to the group. Edit. This was in White Mountain National Forest. It was a campsite called 13 Falls. Pretty cool area and a really easy hike. It was an overall good trip, and I'm sorry I didn't touch, pee on, or defile the tuning forks. I wasn't trying to mess with the ritual dudes. Story 10. When out exploring an old abandoned quarry with some friends, we found this dude standing there staring at a rock, occasionally twitching, but he never turned around. We were We creeped out, so we didn't investigate and left pretty soon after. Later on that night, we found out that another friend was driving down the lane that runs parallel to the quarry and found a guy in a black coat standing in the middle of the road, and he wouldn't move. She was pretty freaked out and had to reverse all the way back up the lane in the dark because he was still there. Pretty sure it was the same guy. Otherwise, it was just a big coincidence. Story 11. I was backpacking in Yellowstone above the tree line at about 10,500 feet. We were hiking on a ridge above a lake when all of a sudden we came across a horse skull. No body, just the skull. Pretty cool looking. We got to our campsite not too far away from the lake near where we found the horse skull. When we climbed down to the lake, we found the body of the horse rotting on the edge of the lake, with negative film strips floating in the water and laying around the shore near the body. Story 12. Over these years, when I have told this story, many people haven't believed me, but it's true as the sky is blue. Me and my brother were hiking out in our new backwoods. We had just moved into a new house, and we stumbled upon a small open grass field. In the center of it, there was a person in a blue jacket crouched over. We thought it was a friend of ours that we had recently met, so I ran out to meet him. I did not have my glasses on, but I got close enough to see that it was a grown man leaned over the carcass of a deer, stabbing it with an unsharpened stick. He looked up and saw me. I was pretty freaked out, so I turned around and yelled at my brother to run, and we started to sprint as fast as we could back home. Story 13. I was on a long run in the medium-sized city I go to university in. I was running alongside the interstate and saw a trail and decided to explore. About 3 kilometers into the trail, I came upon a large group of homeless people that appeared to be worshiping a man. In a suit, the suit man pointed at me when he saw me. Needless to say, I got the hell out of Dodge. Story 14. Fairly avid camper, hiker. Couple that come to mind. 1. We went on a 5-day gold panning trip with a couple buddies of mine. We drove 6 hours down unused logging roads. We're talking totally overgrown roads with trees having to be removed from the road to pass. We saw not one human the entire time we were out there, except for on the 3rd night, at 3 a.m. We were sitting around the fire, drinking some beers, swatting at bugs, and shooting the shit when I hear something. I looked over and noticed some light in the trees. What the? It's a truck driving up the logging road we had cleared ourselves to get there at 3 a.m. The truck gets up to where we are, pulls into where we made camp, a small turn-off spot for logging trucks, sits there for 10 seconds while we all kind of stare in shock at one another. I get up and start walking towards the truck to say hello and ask what the heck they are doing out at 3 a.m. on abandoned logging roads when the truck just backs up, turns around, and drives off the way it came. The guy or guys just drove 6 hours down logging roads all through the night, saw us, and left without saying a word. We are all sitting there going, what the hell? We all figured this guy was driving down the road, getting out, and coming back to kill us in our sleep. Next morning, we headed down the road, and nothing. They didn't set up camp or anything, just left. We figured we were likely camped out near a grow-up for one of the gangs, Hell's Angels most likely, and they were coming out to check who had come out to their spot, or they were there to pick the crop in the middle of the night. 2. One time, driving down a bunch of logging roads at night, 4 a.m., looking for a campsite we had driven past, we took a wrong turn and drove right into a drug operation cashing out the crop. We turn a corner and blom, floodlights and like 15 guys all staring at us in the middle of the forest down logging roads. We just sort of turned around and got the hell out of there. This is a lot like the first story, except I'm the creep in the truck. 3. One time I was out hiking in the backwoods with a buddy of mine, way out there with nobody in sight. In the evening, I start to gather some wood for a campfire, and I pull this stick out of the trees. Stick is maybe 5 feet long, 3 inches wide. It looks like a nice walking stick, straight and mostly smooth. Then I notice that one end of the stick is really smooth, like it's been whittled by someone. I'm thinking, oh wow, what are the odds of that? It is a walking stick. Someone has carved a smooth handle on one end. Nope, it's not a handle. It's a dong. Someone had carved the end of this stick into a dong. Someone was effing the forest, literally. This wasn't some crude carving, just FYI. This was a work, like the person put hours into carving it and was very good at carving. This was a 6-inch dong carved with love and feeling, right down to it having veins and other fine details. What the hell? So I took the stick back to camp and threatened to poke my buddy with it, yelling that the forest was going to give him tree AIDS. Good times. Story 15. I wouldn't call it creepy, but here's my experience. Last year I was with a buddy of mine, and we were going to do the Heart Creek Scramble in Alberta, but due to some health conditions he has, it was going to be too strenuous to complete, so we figured we'd make it an easy day and just do the simple trail. Now, we're both climbers and have been to Heart Creek for rock climbing in the past and had a great time, so it wasn't a surprise to see the sporadic climbers on the mountainside as we went. Heart Creek is also pretty popular and easy for people who just want to go for a nice nature walk and maybe have a picnic. Anyway, we walked in, enjoying the day watching climbers on our way by. We saw a couple even doing some multi-pitch climbing, which means basically leapfrogging up the route. We settled in for lunch about a half hour later and left a couple of hours after that. On our way back, I remember seeing a climbing shoe in the creek and thinking, oh, someone must have lost this. I picked it up when my buddy got my attention, and I looked further downstream. Both climbers, a young man, 29 or so, and his partner, were both lying in the creek bed, rope and harnesses still attached, dead. It was very surreal. We had seen these people climbing not 2 hours before, making their calls, having a good time. The first reaction I had was remembering that there was a family right behind us, a husband and wife with a young daughter who were playing in the creek on the way down. We ran back, stopped them, and explained as quietly as we could what was ahead, and before we knew it, looky-loos had come by. It turned out that the husband was an off-duty RCMP officer, and so he took control of the situation. I learned later we weren't the first on scene, and that the authorities had already been called. It was a very quiet ride back into town that day, though. Edit, more details. The couple who were climbing were both experienced enough, but one was still learning. They attempted to do a dual lowering maneuver using each other's weight and feeding the rope through their belays. One of them made a mistake and lost their end of the rope, and that was it for both of them. There wasn't a lot of blood, strangely, and they looked very peaceful. I didn't get a good look at the girl. I mostly only saw the guy there. The story ran for a couple of days in the area, talking about the male, as the family of the girl didn't want to disclose anything. That was not something I thought I'd see that day, that's for sure. Story 16. Geocaching hike deep in the New Mexico wilderness. Entered a clearing and saw a series of half-built, crumbling concrete structures, rebar poking out of the concrete, and a dirt road approaching from the opposite direction of my hike. Footprints and some recent trash indicated people were still using the site. The whole thing seemed somehow post-apocalyptic and eerie. I was hiking alone, and for some reason the whole situation was freaking me out a bit. I decided to abort the hike and back out the way I had hiked in. Found out later the site was used as a paintball tournament ground and designed on an urban warfare theme. There was absolutely no evidence of spent balls or paint on the concrete walls, which explains my confusion and the eeriness of finding half-destroyed buildings in the middle of nowhere. Story 17. I did a solo bike tour across the US, so I wasn't exactly hiking. I was in eastern Kansas, pretty close to the Missouri border, and I spotted a park in a town that looked pretty secluded, so I decided to camp out there for the night. I started, wheeling my bike over to the gazebo, where I was going to stay when this dude pulls up in a beat-up Ford Taurus. He gets out and comes over to me, asking if I had any money, telling me how his girlfriend ruined his credit and was now with another man. He said he was trying to make his way back to South Dakota. I got a really weird vibe from the dude. He kinda seemed like some sort of junkie. He asked me where I was headed, and he offered to drive me if I would pay for gas. I explained what I was doing, and that it kinda defeated the purpose. He looked dumbfounded, got back in his car, and sped off through the park. I camped out there, and the next morning, when I got up, his car was there, and he was just looking at me. I didn't even have breakfast. I just got the hell out of there. Story 18. I was once canoeing the boundary waters between Minnesota and Canada. These aren't your normal backyard ponds. The boundary waters are thousands of enormous lakes interconnected with each other. Think mini Great Lakes. We had been canoeing and camping along the lakes for about a week at this point. We didn't really have an itinerary, just planned to boat and camp, fish, and live off the land for 2 weeks. We had a GPS and a sat phone to call a helicopter for pickup whenever we were done. Anyway, about a week in, we were set to canoe a few hours to the next lake. An hour or so in, we were in the center of an extremely long and narrow lake. Unfortunately, a storm started to blow in, and the waves on the lake swelled to more than 2 feet, too much for our dinky canoes. We pulled off to a random clearing on the shore and set up camp in a rush to avoid being totally thrashed by the rainstorm. We just set up camp and hunkered down for the night. By the next morning, it had cleared up. We started walking up the coast of the lake, about 200 feet from our camp, looking for a good fishing spot. What we actually found was another campsite. However, it was absolutely wrecked, trash strewn everywhere, tent collapsed and torn, clothes on the ground. At first, we were just disgusted like, what a-holes did this? Or left their shit out to be bear food. The more we looked around though, the weirder things seemed. For one, their garbage was still hoisted into a tree to keep it safe from bears, but the whole bag was ripped open despite being 30 feet in the air. Second, literally everything except the canoes was still at the campsite. Clothes, packs, food, rope, pans, like a serious set of hiking equipment. Enough for 2 or 3 people. Half of it was trashed and torn open, mostly the packs, tent, and clothes. The other half was totally untouched but thrown on the ground, like somebody noped the hell out of there in nothing but their long johns, ditching hundreds of dollars of gear in the process. We waited a couple of hours and eventually called it back to our helicopter crew, but they hadn't been aware of anybody else or gotten any distress calls. We eventually just left everything and moved camp. Everybody was pretty upset by it, and a day or two later, we ended the whole trip early because it seemed like nobody wanted to be out anymore. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. First thought was a bear attack, but there was food left uneaten, and I've seen bear attacks on camps before, but nothing like this. Bears rip open packs and go after food, and are generally pretty easy to scare away. What still sticks with me is why all their clothes and packs were still there, with half being totally destroyed and half being untouched. I still don't get it. I've done a lot of other camping and hiking, rafting and biking all around the country, and I've never had any other weird experiences like that. Story 19. This old woman hiker in her 70s somehow saw us in reverse order through a wormhole or something. The first time we saw her, she said, "Oh, well, hello again." I just passed it off as her being old, slightly senile. Then 30 minutes later, we saw her again. And this time, she just said, "Hi," as she passed us. I'm not even sure how she got there. She was going the opposite direction of us on the trail both times. Story 20. Neither weird nor creepy. But in middle school, a bunch of friends and I were hiking when we were approached by a mute kid making the extended fingers hole motion with his hands. We weren't sure what was going on, so one of my friends yells, "He wants to essay us! Get the knives!" Afraid, we all busted out our pocket knives, and the poor kid ran back into the woods. A few minutes into the hike, we spotted an amorous couple furiously getting it on inside an old VW Beetle. We think the generous mute kid just wanted to share his pervy discovery with us. But we scared him off with knives. Story 21. My dad and I were out camping in the mountains. We had just set up our tents when we heard screaming in the woods. As black folks, we don't stick around to find out what's going on, so we packed up our stuff and drove to a different area. We were fully convinced it was mountain people eating other people or something. We drove down to a nearby store and told the clerk that we had heard screams. Turns out it was an orgy for people who dress up in animal costumes. He told us they'd been doing it for years. Story 22. I grew up in Brooklyn and, for a long time, had never seen a wooded area. When I was a young teen, someone took me to Prospect Park, and we started walking through the trails in the wooded sections. That alone was scary enough for me. I had never seen woods before and found it creepy and dark. All of a sudden, I saw a white girl's face with a wide, vacant stare, her mouth open in a silent scream, looking straight at me from the bushes. My heart jumped into my throat. Everyone knows psycho serial rapists dump bodies in the woods. It took me a good 30 seconds to realize that some weirdo had dumped an inflatable banging doll in the bushes. Story 23. A mate and I were hiking through the bush near Tamborine Mountain, Australia, back in 2010. We made our own trail, slashing through lantana and vines with machetes. It was a lot of fun, really off the beaten track. A couple of hours into the hike, we started hearing dum bum bum bum, the unmistakable beat of jungle drums. Frigging weird as hell, right? For context, these drum beats had absolutely no place in the Australian jungle. Naturally, our curiosity got the better of us, so we headed toward the sound. After hacking through a thick wall of vines, we emerged into a clearing and saw the source of the drums. About 25 guys, islander or black in appearance, were wearing grass skirts and dancing around a fire. They noticed us. The drums stopped instantly, like a needle scratch, or a piano cutting out in an old Western saloon. Utter silence. Every single one of them just stared at us. We absolutely shat ourselves. Then a director ran up, yelled, "Cut," and asked us what the hell we thought we were doing. We'd accidentally wandered onto the film set of a Kit Kat commercial. Story 24. Old dude soloing. This has seriously happened to me 4 times. The creepiest one was when I was hiking alone and decided to camp in a clearing next to a creek for the night. I hadn't washed in a few days, so I figured I'd take a swim. No one was around, so I went all out. I climbed out of the water and started toweling myself off. I was drying my hair, and the towel was covering my face. When I pulled the towel away, there was an old man standing right in front of me, completely bare, soloing. I shouted at him that he was a creep, and he scurried off into the woods making weird growling noises. I did not sleep well that night. Story 25. This wasn't while hiking, but once a friend and I were driving on an old dirt road way out in the sticks in South Alabama. We were past an old 19th century cemetery when, out of nowhere, a truck started tailgating us. It was really late at night, and even during the daytime, it would have been rare to see another vehicle out there, so we were already creeped out. I sped up, and the truck stayed right on my bumper. Now, I'm driving as fast as I can without flying off the road on this narrow, winding dirt track. Think Dukes of Hazzard, but in a Volvo station wagon. And I still couldn't shake the truck. My buddy knew the area well and told me we were coming up on a paved road T-bone intersection. He also said there was a smaller dirt road branching off at a sharp angle from that intersection. He told me that if I could get just far enough ahead to break the truck's line of sight, I could cut the wheel hard to the left and whip into that spur road, hopefully ditching whoever was following us. I did exactly what he said, but right as I started the turn at the intersection, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing just inside the tree line across the paved road was what looked like an incredibly tall person, covered head to toe in long hair. As I was turning, I shouted, "Holy crap, do you see?" And before I could finish, my friend said, "That big, tall, hairy guy." I completed the turn, we ditched the truck, and got the hell out of there. To this day, neither of us knows what we saw. Story 26. My hometown is a tiny little place called Kanab, Utah. If you've been to Zion National Park, Bryce Canyon, or the Grand Staircase, you've been close to it. Anyway, the hills right around Kanab are full of hidden gems, tons of ruins and relics from Native Americans, dinosaur tracks, slot canyons, and more. One of my favorite hikes is a place called Trail Canyon. It's only accessible by hiking. The canyon forks many times, and each fork seems to have a different treasure. Here are some of the things I've found. 1. A cave perfectly hidden by a tree, with old carvings from somebody who hid out, there in the 1800s. 2. More than one temporary shelter. One was a natural shelter created by two boulders leaning against each other. Inside was a half-decomposed sleeping bag, cans, and other paraphernalia from the 1970s. Somebody lived there for a while, then never came back. 3. A cabin built at 1/3 normal proportions. It turned out to be the home of a couple of brothers who were little people in the early 1900s. Being different meant they probably didn't get treated well, so they built their own place how they liked it and stayed there. They'd ride their horses into town, get drunk, shoot their guns, and then ride back up to their cabin by the spring. Today there's still a pair of overalls on the table, so you can get an idea of their size. I know I took a bunch of pictures of this, but I can't find them. Still looking. 4. Just beyond the cabin is a cave where cattle rustlers used to hide out. There's still an old bucket and frying pan, and the walls are scored with markings indicating sizes and locations of herds. If you're ever in the neighborhood, stop by the BLM office and ask for a good hike. There are dozens. Edit. Oh yeah, once I found a shed miles from anywhere, hidden under a few cottonwood trees, that was full of movie props from The Apple Dumpling Gang Rides Again. Story 27. A few summers ago, I was canoeing in the Boundary Waters with some friends. A few days into our trip, at least 2 days of paddling from the nearest entry point, we found the creepiest campsite on an island. There was brand new abandoned camping equipment everywhere. A sleeping bag, a camping pad. Throughout the campsite, sticks with charred ends had been stuck in the ground. In the remains of the fire was a heavily charred toothbrush, along with the remains of a wallet, glasses, papers, and some clothes. The creepiest part was near the edge, where a single petrified moose altar had been wedged between some boulders, and surrounded by charred sticks in a circle. We got the hell out of there, and as far away as we could before night. One of the creepiest things I've ever seen. It looked straight out of a horror movie. Story 28. In junior high, my family drove halfway across the country for a family reunion. We went for a long, boring hike. When we reached the end of the hike, I decided to take off running down the mountain by myself. By the time I got to the bottom, I was dehydrated and exhausted. A couple in their 40s saw that I wasn't doing well and called an ambulance. The EMTs told my mom I could have died had those people not called 911. I remember wanting to thank them, but they were long gone. Fast forward to my senior year in high school. I'm taking world literature with a new teacher. The teacher walks in the room and says, "You saved my life 6 years ago at Yellowstone Park." It took me a few seconds, but he remembered the whole thing. Story 29. my girlfriend, and I were hiking the Appalachian Trail. Not through hiking, just seeing how much we had time to do on and off for 3 months, and we hadn't seen anyone for a while. I was ahead when I came across a very large brass eagle on a stump, middle of nowhere. It was heavy. As we went along, we kept finding more random detritus, one object left behind at a time. That night, we got to a shelter, and there was this old guy, very disheveled, with a walking staff that had a baby doll head on top. Immediate creepy vibes. It was just us and him at the shelter that night. We stayed on the top level, and he was down below. I don't think I slept at all. It got really creepy when he started telling stories about how he used to drive a cab in New Orleans. He said he didn't mind if people banged in the back of his cab because he could watch in the rearview mirror. We got up early the next day and got the hell out of there. We left him some power bars, as he looked like he needed them. He probably had schizophrenia. Story 30. This past winter, I hiked one of high peaks in the ADKs with a buddy of mine and camped out overnight. Everything was fine the entire first day we were there. Had a great night's sleep and woke up early to hike back to the parking area. On the way back down the trail, my friend and I noticed that someone else had been hiking as well. About a mile after walking, I stopped and saw that my full name, first and last, was drawn into the snow on the side of the footpath. I didn't do it, neither did my friend. It was snowing a bit throughout the night, and if it was drawn the day before, the snow would have covered it up. We got a bit freaked out and decided to hustle back to our car so we could get the hell out of there. We finally get back to the parking area, and I go to sign myself out of the registry book. When I turn the page to where I signed in, I see that someone had scribbled out all of my information so you couldn't read it anymore. No one else had. Signed into the book besides myself for 3 days. I will not be going back there. Story 31. A few years ago, I was backpacking in Eastern Washington with some friends of mine. I don't know how well you guys know Eastern Washington, but it's pretty much dust, sagebrush, and dirt. We decided to hike up onto the top of this canyon, and from up there you could see miles and miles of straight nothing. After a few hours of traversing the top of the cliff, we eventually found a little crevasse that kind of took us a little ways underground into a pretty decent-sized cave. The cave was filled with little bones, like mice and bats. In one of the corners of the cave, there was a rock fixture that jutted up from the ground and almost made a separate room, so to speak. In the room, we found lots of scratches on the walls, photographs, and 3 bottles with notes in them. While this was kind of off-putting on its own, we figured it was just some sort of joke, and we'd find silly SOS notes in the bottles. The scariest part about it all was the photographs were super ordinary, of families and normal people, and 2 of the notes in the bottles made no sense at all. While it was English, it was pretty much straight gibberish. None of the words made sense in context with the other words. The 3rd bottle had a super ordinary letter talking about what they've been up to, something you'd send to a fairly distant relative after not talking with them for a while. I don't really know what to think of it all. I feel like it could easily have been someone just joking around, but it was almost too strange for that. Edit. For all the people who are asking where it was, I'm fairly certain it was at a place called Dusty Lakes. Story 32. Hiking in Virginia, 2 days in and 20+ miles from anything. In the middle of the night, while we were sitting around the campfire, we hear a major commotion coming down the ridge above our trail. Out of nowhere, some guy hauls ass by our site wearing a jogging suit and a small, kid-size backpack. 2 minutes later, 2 other guys come down the hill from the same place. No trail. Both leading German shepherds and dressed in FBI-type clothing. I'm thinking we were close to some hillbilly pot fields. Also, the brown mountain lights in NC are pretty odd. Story 33. This must have been around 1992. I was camping and hiking with a friend in the Lake District, and we were making our way through Borrowdale along the Derwent. It's a popular part of the country. There's always plenty of tourists out and about. I was following my friend, and we rounded a large boulder by the river, and he stopped. We did that comedy thing of me not paying attention and bumping into him. He indicated to me to shush, and I poked my head around to see what had made him stop. Stood in the middle of the river was a man soloing, shirt pulled up and tucked under his chin. Trousers nowhere to be seen. We sniggered, shook our heads, and took a different route. He didn't see us. We ambled and dawdled further along the route, and after a snack stop, we could hear what sounded like girls squealing. We decided to investigate, and who did we see but the him once again. Only this time he was flashing at girls on the other side of the river. Gripped by an adolescent sense of justice, we decided something must be done. But being a pair of fairly weedy nerds, we thought getting the police would be better. It was agreed my friend would jog up to the nearest road to flag down someone to call the police, and I'd remain behind to keep an eye on Mr. Wavy Dong. I skulked unseen behind a tree and kept watch. After a couple of minutes, something must have unnerved him. I'm assuming an infuriated parent starting to wade across the river or something. As he left the riverbank and headed straight through the woods toward where I was hiding, I was sitting in a hollow in the roots of a tree. He walked straight past me and turned to look behind him. He was only feet away. I stopped breathing. He stared through the trees for what felt like an eternity. I thought I was doomed. Then he just turned away and headed back up to the road. I followed him to the road and figured out he was headed for the nearest car park. My friend had gone that way to find someone to call the police, so we met up as he was coming back to find me, and we were able to get the registration of the van that Flashman had got into. Within a minute of him driving off, a police car arrived with full blue lights and squealing tires. We waved them down, and they were there to respond to the call my friend had convinced someone to make to 999 for us. We gave a brief description and the van details. The police were delighted, as this guy had been doing this for years, but people would see him and run off to call the police. How did we ever cope before mobiles? And he'd have disappeared by the time they arrived. We arranged to make fuller statements at the station and started to drive back. Luckily, we were parked in the same car park, and the police would follow us back to Keswick. About halfway back along the valley, I checked the rearview mirror and saw the police car slam on the brakes and throw on the lights. They disappeared down a track off the road. When we got to the station to make our statements, we were pulled into a side room and told to be quiet. The policeman told us they had spotted the van as we were driving back and had gone looking for him. They had found the flasher with his shirt off and flies undone prowling through the woods. Unfortunately, there were no available cells in the station, small town, so he was being held in one of the offices next to where we were. Arrangements were made to return to take part in an identity parade and to point out our man. When we did return later, the police told us he had now refused to take part in an ID parade, so we were asked whether we would be prepared to be taken into the room he was being held in, look him in the eye, and confirm it was the flasher. We agreed, screw it, it's not like we had to live there, and confirmed that was the guy. Full statements were given, justice was done, and we would eventually receive a lovely letter from the Cumbrian top cop thanking us for our efforts. As we left the station, feeling rather exhilarated after our small adventure, Mr. Wagglenob's wife, we assumed, arrived. Before the doors closed fully behind us, we could hear her shouting, "You dirty jerk, you've been doing it again, haven't you?" Story 34. Not my story, but a friend's. He was with his wife hiking on a trail somewhere in Vancouver. He noticed a tree stump that had a plastic bag sitting on top of it. His curiosity got the best of him because it seemed to be filled with something. He approached it and noticed drops of blood around the bag. At this point, he was worried that he would find a dead baby or a decapitated head. His wife kept urging him to ignore it, but he really wanted to see what was inside. He grabbed a stick and prodded it slowly, opening the bag to reveal a bloody rag. He unraveled the rag with the stick to discover a giant bloody toy dong with a note attached saying, "Play with me." Story 35. I was mountain biking with my dad and a bunch of his friends, and we came to the last long downhill of the ride. I always let them go first because I am way faster. They go down, and I wait for 5 minutes, then go for it. I get 200 yards from the end of the trail, and they are all on one side of the trail stopped in a line. At this point, there is no way I can stop fast enough, so I just get ready to jump anything in the way of the trail. My dad freaks the hell out telling me, "Stop, stop, stop." As soon as I get within 20 feet, I see probably 30 big-ass rattlesnakes crossing the trail. I immediately pull up as hard as I can and bunny hop about 10 feet over all of them. Then I stopped, came back, and checked out the snakes, along with my dad's blood pressure, made sure he was okay, then finished the ride. I'm telling you, sickest bunny hop ever. Story 36. A buddy and I went backpacking in the Sespe Wilderness in California. One time we found a small cabin with a water reservoir. We carefully approached, not sure if it was people growing weed or something. We went up to the open door and saw a Nazi flag on the wall and no one inside. We checked out the cabin and found lots of neo-Nazi stuff and a double-headed axe. Engraved on the axe head was, "83 I was there and you were not." I thought about taking it, Because it was cool and I didn't mind stealing from Nazis. I left it and we hiked at least 7 more miles and slept under the stars that night. In the morning, we both had year 83 quarters on our backpacks. Story 37. This was creepy, not supernaturally so. Just because of what it was. I was camping and hiking in the Okefenokee swamp. We, my girlfriend and me, were far from being the only ones there, but when we woke up one morning, we took a canoe out in the swamp to explore. It was early, and there was a thick layer of fog resting just atop the water. The whole swamp was completely still. No animals in sight at all. We paddled down the waterway for a while and saw nothing else. Not a single person. Not a bird. Not anything. We didn't hear a single sound. We had just rounded a bend in the swamp when we heard it. The loudest guttural bellow I had ever heard in my life. I could feel it echo through my chest. A true dinosaur sound. We stopped paddling and looked at each other, a little creeped out. We knew it was an alligator, but we had never heard one that loud. We both looked behind the canoe, and behind us the backs and eyes of at least 20 alligators had risen. They had just surfaced out of nowhere. We slowly started to paddle forward and we heard more bellows. They came from all around us, in front, behind, to the sides, sounds emanating from the bush-covered banks. Each glance behind us we saw more eyes appear, more scaled mounds breaking the water's surface. From the banks in front we would catch tails sliding into the water. Ripples of these huge reptiles broke the water all around us. We looked back again as we paddled faster. Easily 40 alligators were behind us now, and we began to see them appear in front. 10 to 15 huge lizards seemingly blocking our path. Then, one of the largest alligators I have ever seen surfaced right where my paddle was going down. I hit the beast on the back of the head, and the thrash it made was incredible. When its massive head hit the side of the small canoe, I thought we were going in the water. Water came into the canoe as the side dipped down. The beast disappeared below the boat, and we held steady. We paddled forward as fast as we could, right into the dotted landscape of scales and eyes. Behind us, that same guttural roar echoed through my body. As we cut through the field of eyes and backs, we started to see the path clear. The huge monster that had almost capsized us bellowed one last time. We turned as we made it past the last of the animals and could see the monster staring at us, watching us leave. All the other alligators began to sink to the water's floor. The big guy stayed there watching until he was satisfied. We had gone, I guess. Then he disappeared without a sound, back into the black, murky depths of the swamp. We banked the canoe further up the waterway, got out, and just sat around for a while, taking in what had just happened. Story 38. I went canoeing and camping with some friends on a river in Florida. We stopped to eat lunch and were messing around in the water when I saw a pumpkin floating by. My first thought was to pick it up and chuck it at one of my buddies, so I waded over to it. When I touched it, the pumpkin rolled over and it had been hollowed out, and someone had stuck a chicken in it. Not a cooked chicken, a real chicken, feathers and all. They had cut a hole in the top of the pumpkin and pulled the chicken's head through it, and its little legs and tips of its wings were hanging out of the bottom. We figured it was some kind of Santeria thing, maybe. Either way, it freaked me out. Story 39. I can't remember the name of the pass, but we were crossing the mountains from Nevada into California on our way to Yosemite to hike Half Dome. There was a place in the pass where a couple of abandoned buildings stood, an old house, an old motel, lots of trash like appliances and bicycles. We drove past the abandoned small town, which was very eerie at dusk, and went up a road to the top of a small hill overlooking the town and the rest of the mountain range. It was a very pretty view, but the sun was setting fast, so we set up a shade for some cover and laid out the rest of the cots and bags to sleep under the stars. My younger sister was especially creeped out about sleeping under the stars up the hill from a spooky empty motel. The next morning, my dad called me over to a spot 5 feet from where my sister was still sleeping, behind a medium-sized bush, and pointed out a grave. It was one of those old west-looking graves where the dirt is piled high and the cross is made from found wood nearby. My sister freaked out when we showed her. Nothing too scary happened after that, but I was glad to tear down camp and leave right away. Story 40. I was a leader helping with a scout's hike. It was 22 kilometers, 13.5 miles, and we were getting close to the end. At about the 19-kilometer point, the kids were getting tired and bitching about the hike, how their feet hurt, etc., when one of the kids spotted a corn DVD on the ground. How it got to the middle of rural farmland surrounded by forests, I have no idea. Probably someone ditching it, where they knew it wouldn't be found. It got them so giddy and excited that any trace of tiredness vanished instantly. All we heard out of them for the rest of the hike was talk of the corn DVD. The lesson: never underestimate the inspiring power of corn on young guys, even if there's no way they can actually see it. Story 41. A few years ago, I was hiking somewhere on the border of Montana and Idaho. The exact location escapes me at the moment. I was with my uncle, and the hike was something like 6 miles in and 6 miles out from the trailhead to a lake. Keep in mind, this is a very remote area. To even get to the trailhead was about a 20 to 30 mile drive in on dirt and logging roads. There were no other cars at the trailhead, and we didn't see anyone on the trail the entire day. On the hike in, we noticed a makeshift camp set up along the trail to our right. This was by no means a designated camping area. It just happened to be enough of a clearing to pitch a tent and have a small area to walk around in. The camp looked somewhat disheveled, and there was nobody in immediate sight. We continued on to the lake, ate lunch, and headed home sometime later in the afternoon. On our way back, the camp was now to our left. Now that we were headed in the opposite direction, the camp came into view much sooner along the trail than it did on our hike in. It was a few minutes until we actually reached this camp. I had a very eerie feeling now. From this direction, I could see that the tent flap was completely unzipped. I found this strange and scanned the camp for its resident or residents. By the time we reached the camp, nobody had appeared, and I decided to yell out to anyone who might be there. Maybe to say hello, maybe to see if anyone needed help. I just had a strange feeling that something was wrong here. At this point, my uncle was very much freaked out and was trying to continue walking along without incident. I yelled out 3 or 4 times toward the camp, each time walking closer and closer to the tent. I got no response. I stood a few feet away from the tent and scanned around the hills, and there was nobody in sight. The camp looked exactly the same as it did on our hike in. Upon further inspection, I could see a few items strewn about the ground beyond the tent. But my first stop was definitely going to be the tent. I thought for a few seconds and pondered exactly what I might find inside. I was scared of waking someone, but more scared of finding someone who might not be able to wake up. I crept closer, my uncle reluctantly following about 10 paces behind. I yelled a few more times, no answer. I pushed aside the flap, and there was nothing but a sleeping bag, laid out perfectly as if someone had just unrolled it. Keep in mind, this was a very nice tent. Perfectly assembled too. Nice vestibule, spacious, and sturdy. It struck me as odd that someone with such a nice tent would have been so foolish as to leave it unzipped, so I stood and scanned again. This tent was a few hundred feet away from a very small water source. There were various items, as I said earlier, every 50 feet or so. I noticed a Ziploc bag on top of a boulder right next to the stream. I headed over and found that it contained several strips of uncooked bacon. Again, strange. My thoughts were racing, and I had an overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I put the bacon back where I found it and looked around again. Nobody was there. We hadn't seen anyone all day, and this camp looked exactly the same as it did in the morning. Who in their right mind would leave a bag of bacon sitting right there? Who would even bring bacon into a place like this? And how? There was no ice chest, not even a car at the trailhead. Why would you bring food like that into an area where there are mountain lions as well as bears? There wasn't even a stove or any cooking utensils in sight. This was a very barren camp. My thoughts began to slow down, and I looked at my feet. I saw several shell casings and several rounds for a .45 caliber handgun. This was the icing on the what the F cake. My uncle insisted we leave immediately, and at this point, I agreed. We hiked out rather quickly. Counting paces, I calculated that the makeshift camp was about 1 mile from the trailhead. I still have no idea what could have happened at that camp. It still freaks me out, but it makes for a very good story. Story 42. Perhaps you'll consider this weird. I used to do so much backpacking that I think I spent more time in the mountains than in my home. I found myself one evening in a pristine forested area far from people, and it had wonderful hot springs. Slept in a tent there, near the hot springs, and in the morning I clambered out of my tent, eagerly jumping into the wonderful hot pool of water for a morning bath, surrounded by pine trees and chatting birds. Soon, I recall, I heard heavy feet plodding through the dents, forest and branches being broken. Suddenly, there was a huge moose with equally huge antlers standing there at the other edge of my hot spring pool. My heart stopped, I think, for a moment, as we locked eyes. The moose slowly moved into the opposite end of the pool of warm water. For what seemed an eternity, that moose and I shared the same hot spring-filled pool of water, without uttering a word to each other, and then he simply slowly walked away. I am a huntress and have a healthy respect for large animals, but this is a moment forever etched in my memory. Story 43. When I was a venture scout, my crew and I went to New Mexico for a backpacking trip. On the 8th day in, 2 other guys and myself had to go fetch creek water that was 2 miles away, or so the map said. We'd already hiked around 6 miles that day, so by the time we set out, it was getting close to sundown. As we made our way to the creek, we came to a fork in the road and had to consult the map. The oldest of us was on watch duty in case any feral animal came upon us, and we needed to hightail it out there. Well, while my other friend and I were figuring out which road to take, the watchman taps us on the shoulder and tells us to be quiet. We shut up and look to where he is pointing. It was what I assumed to be a mountain lion, maybe 300 feet from us and 50 feet above us on the cliff. He was looking right at us. For whatever reason, he never pounced or attacked us. He was just observing us. We carefully backed away from him, and once we thought we reached a safe distance, we just calmly hiked away. All the while, our hearts were pounding. In the end, we got the water after being observed by what we thought was a mountain lion, scared poopless. Story 44. A cage. Not like a trapping cage or anything, but something that could easily hold 5 to 10 average-sized people. I was hiking in the mountains just above the house I lived in at the time, in Missoula, Montana. Took maybe 45 minutes of walking, mostly uphill and without a path, to get to the spot. Round steel bars for the edges and rope instead of chain link for the walls and ceiling. It was all set up just on the far side of the ridgeline I was walking, so it couldn't be seen, I suppose. Nothing around it, no footprints or tire tracks or anything. The rope looked undamaged as well. No idea what it was for, but it definitely creeped me the hell out. Story 45. Several years ago, a friend and I were hiking along the AT in North Georgia, and we stopped on a baldy hilltop overlooking a scenic valley with pines and dogwoods along the bottom by a creek. It had been overcast all day with rumblings of thunder, but no rain. I was looking down at the bottom of the valley, and suddenly all the trees in one spot started shaking violently back and forth, and then the cloud cover above it dropped like a ton of bricks. It was a moment I will never forget. It looked like the clouds in an area of 100 square meters just fell out of the sky and slammed into the treetops at the bottom of the valley. Branches, leaves, and debris exploded from the trees like something from Lost or King Kong. I was expecting any moment for a giant gorilla to come bounding out of the tree cover. Then a small funnel cloud formed right above it. Keep in mind, we were about 200 meters away, on the top of a bald-ass hilltop. Luckily, the tornado petered out after only a few seconds, and we got the heck off the top of that hill and down the other side into tree cover. I was so amped up on adrenaline, I had to drink about 4 or 5 rusty nails that night to go to sleep. Very awesome experience that I will never forget. We are small and insignificant compared to Mother Nature. We control nothing. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.